Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, June 30th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the 4 toss-up states as designated by Larry Sabato's crystal ball in their 2024 election cycle analysis, indicating where both campaigns, Democrat and Republican, will likely be spending the most amount of money ahead of the upcoming presidential election. Now, looking at where we are in terms of the presidential race, we are on track for a rematch of the last election. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are expected to face off against each other as their respective party nominees. As surprising as it is, yes, the former president is leading by a very significant amount. I say more so surprising that a former president would ever be in the race, but less surprising that once he announced that he would ultimately end up leading. Today, Donald Trump is all but the presumptive Republican nominee for president, leading in every single statewide poll that has been released recently, including Ron DeSantis' home state of Florida. Now, on the Democratic side, there isn't much competitive polling. Joe Biden polling in the high 60s, low 70s, and while not the most impressive result for an incumbent president, obviously on track to be renominated by the Democratic Party. So in where we are right now, Donald Trump and Joe Biden in an election face-off has led Larry Sabato's crystal ball to release their early 2024 election ratings. This means that they are characterizing each individual state as how they expect it to vote in the upcoming election. They start off with 43 toss-up electoral votes, with 235 going to the GOP and 260 going to the Democrats. That means the Republican Party is 35 electoral votes away from victory, whereas the Democrats are just 10 votes away. But in this map, you can see that they narrow in on just 4 states that they determined to be toss-ups at this point in time, meaning that it can go either way. For a bit of context, the respective victories for the Democratic Party in all 4 of these states, because they won all 4 of them in the last election, Nevada was 2 points, Arizona was 0.3, Georgia was 0.2, and Wisconsin was 0.6. The point is, the margins were far from impressive for the Democratic Party, but still monumental victories in the sense that Arizona had flipped for the first time since 96, Georgia had flipped for the first time since 92. No time in the 21st century had Democrats been able to win there statewide until Joe Biden's presidential victory. Now, looking at our map here, let's go ahead and open up the presidential one. It is quite interesting that we are narrowing in on these 4 states. I mean, in the last election, we narrowed in on a significantly higher amount of these states. What that means is that there were more toss-up states. The Cook Political Report and Inside Elections and other firms are expected to release their 2024 Electoral College ratings soon, so it'll be interesting to compare, but at least at the bare minimum, the most accurate predictor from the last election, which is the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia, Larry Sabato's crystal ball here, they were very accurate last time. And, finding these results to be similar to what we saw the last time is not super surprising, but it is a little bit boring, right? We have to admit that we maybe were expecting a little bit more of a shakeup, but it makes sense. We're working with the same candidates. These states haven't dramatically changed in the past 4 years, but what it does tell us is that there is a bit more of an understanding about what is a toss-up and what isn't for this map. I wish I had it up. I wish I had brought it up before this video, but there is a 2020 Electoral College rating map from the Crystal Ball from 2019 that they released around April, in which it designated a lot more swing states and a lot more competitive states, to be quite frank with you. States like Texas and Iowa and Ohio were either toss-ups or lean Republican. Today, they stand as likely Republican. Florida joins the ranks as another likely Republican state. At that point in time in 2019, it had been a toss-up. It wasn't just 4 toss-up states. You had way more, and the Democrats started off significantly less away from winning. In fact, Republicans started out with a higher advantage at 248 electoral votes on the map. So what we were working with then was more competitive states, and it wasn't just the crystal ball that had this indication. The last time we talked about this, and for the sake of just calling them, I'll use the Republican one. For the sake of calling them swing states, ignore the red. Just assume that it's a collar picker for these states. The ones that we typically regarded as swing states, well, they went as so far as to characterize states like Virginia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, states that aren't characterized, quite frankly, as these 4 core toss-up states by the map. And the reasoning made sense, at least at that point in time. This was the map where you had competitive states from the last election. Every single state I've highlighted was won by single digits in the 2016 presidential election. States like Minnesota were decided by 1.5 points. States like Wisconsin were decided by 0.7 points. I mean, these were narrow states. To be fair, though, Texas was a state decided by 9 points, Ohio and Iowa by 8 points. So they were thrown into the ring here as these competitive states. But quite frankly, historically, they had been. What I think we've realized now is that 2020 was not a reversion back to old politics, though there was that sense of a more moderate tone, a lesser of two evils election than 2016. We still saw many of these states stick with their 2016 election results, and in fact, in some states, become more conservative, like the state of Nevada, which actually shifted to the right. So with those results, what I think the crystal ball has done is realized Minnesota went more Democrat. Iowa became the same Republican. Ohio solidified itself, right? Michigan went to Biden by 3. That's not as competitive as Wisconsin. Pennsylvania, recently in the midterm elections, had an astounding result for Democrats. Virginia went to Biden by double digits. So did Colorado. So did New Mexico. New Hampshire was 8 points, right? So you're starting to see where you pick away. Okay, Texas, while within reach for Democrats in the future, was still a 6-point margin for President Trump. Ron DeSantis just won Florida by 20 points, right? North Carolina hasn't gone to a Democrat since 2008, and that was a 14,000 vote victory. So they don't want to be wrong, in this state. Maine went solidly for Joe Biden, 9 points across the state. Maine's 2nd district was a likely margin for Donald Trump, right? Nebraska's 2nd district went to Biden by 7 points. And then you're left with these. You're left with states, with the exception of Nevada, that were decided by less than a percentage point, that are so fascinating, to say the least. I look at this and I question the future of American politics if it does come down to these 4 states. Because now we've thrown out these heavily considered states from before that we aren't even considering to be the most crucial and the most pivotal, even though they might be. And I think that this is a very narrow way of thinking. I don't think that this is the actual way I'm going to look at the election, because that's not smart. But what this does tell you is that this is where the ground game, where the ads, where the really, really tough work is going to begin and where it's going to end. We can assume that many of these other states, while sure, this crystal ball could be wrong, and I don't doubt that they might be wrong about a state. Pennsylvania could go red. Michigan could go red. Florida, no, not Florida. North Carolina could go blue, right? That's a reality. That's a possibility. It's a sensible one. At the same time, working within these 4 states, I recognize that these are probably going to be the most competitive. I don't imagine that Pennsylvania will be more competitive than Nevada, especially after the midterm election results. And we'll get into the midterms because those really tell us a very fascinating story about the state of the race in these 4 states. As a reminder, Joe Biden won them all in the last election. You have to keep that in mind as well. Nevada went blue, Arizona went blue, Wisconsin went blue, and Georgia went blue. But in 2016, well, it was nearly an entire reversal. So you have to understand that there are some pretty interesting factors at play here. But what I will say is that what I want us to do is, we already know the 2020 margins. I've told you them multiple times. I want to look at the most recent election. 2018, in fact, would be better for Democrats. So we're going to look at 2022 because it was a worse off year. And yet somehow we draw the same conclusion that Democrats, quite frankly, are in a good position in these 4 states as well, which is why they're in a good position for a re-election bid against President Trump. So with these 4 toss-up states identified, looking at the last election, we can go through one by one and discuss what it means to be a Trump-like candidate in Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and Wisconsin, because quite frankly, it matters. Let's start off with the Senate elections, where we can start to see where the Trump-style candidacies really did not work out in the way that the Republican Party was hoping. We'll start off in the state of Wisconsin. Okay, why am I talking about this one? Well, Ron Johnson wasn't the Trump Republican. Though he did align himself ideologically with Donald Trump, is one of the more conservative members of the United States Senate, he didn't start off that way. He was a Tea Party conservative in 2010, ran for re-election in 2016, and for all purposes was seen as this sensible, moderate Republican. Even though his record didn't reflect that, voters didn't care. That's the way he was perceived. And I will also say, the state of Wisconsin is one the Democrats didn't think they were going to win. Mandela Barnes was seen as this sacrificial lamb. Yes, he had a fighting chance, but then came in the money. Then came in Ron Johnson's full-fledged force at re-election that ultimately was successful. But the Republicans only won here by 1 point. This is a warning sign. Ron Johnson was slated for a 3, 4, 5-point victory based off the polls. For Republicans to underperform the polls, that's quite significant. Not to mention that Mandela Barnes running in one of the whitest states in the country as the black lieutenant governor, well, you can't deny that there is a factor of race when it comes down to voting. I'm not saying he lost because of his race, but I'm saying it's a factor, as it is a factor in everyone's everyday life. looking at Mandela Barnes as the Democratic lieutenant governor at the time, sure, he had some level of statewide recognition. But what I do want to say is that this, again, was not a race Democrats were expecting to win. They came closer. In fact, Ron Johnson won by lesser of a margin than Democrats were able to win by in Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and many other competitive states. Just food for thought. But with Ron Johnson's victory here, it showed that a more, at least perception-wise, moderate Republican was able to do well. He won by a point. Let's check out the other states and see how the other Trumpian candidates did. In the state of Georgia, Herschel Walker, who was propped up immediately by Donald Trump, very early on, before he even decided that he was going to run, he lost by 2 points against Warnock. In fact, 3 points when you count all the votes together. 3 points in the state of Georgia. For reference, Joe Biden won the state by 0.2. Herschel Walker, as the Trump-style candidate, demolished across the state. In the state of Arizona, same story. Blake Masters, the Trump candidate who was propped up in this primary, won the nomination, lost to Mark Kelly by a 5-point margin against all odds. This was supposed to be an immediate flip given the national circumstance. Mark Kelly did worse in 2020 when the national popular vote was Biden plus 4.5. In 2022, it was Republicans plus 2, plus 3. It was a significantly more conservative environment, yet he doubled his margin of victory. Now, to be fair to Adam Laxalt, he was a recognized name. He was the Attorney General from 2015 through 2019. He was the Republican nominee for governor in 2018, but he still benefited from the Trump endorsement. And not to mention, the avid campaigning that Donald Trump did for him virtually doesn't send the best message. Adam Laxalt, as many of the Republicans were tied to Donald Trump's ideology and demolished in the state of Nevada for what was otherwise, quite frankly, a very winnable race. The takeaway from Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Georgia is that there seems to be one type of Republican that wins, but everywhere else, you don't really see them even being nominated, which is the case for the presidential election. But the Senate elections don't tell us everything. The governor elections reaffirm my points, in fact. We'll start off in reverse order. The state of Nevada will be the final state, the first state we look at, and then we'll move all the way over to Wisconsin. In the state of Nevada, Joe Lombardo won against Steve Sisolak by a margin of about 1.4%. Now, Joe Lombardo is definitely a little bit more of a right-wing Republican. Right-wing Republicans is redundant. More of a more right-wing Republican. But he still was able to do well. The reason being, he wasn't as closely associated with Donald Trump in the way that many of these other Republicans were, especially in the governor races. Look at Doug Mastriano, Tudor Dixon, Tim Michels, all of which won their primaries largely in part to Donald Trump's endorsement. That wasn't the case in the governor's race in the state of Nevada. Steve Sisolak was also uniquely unpopular, moderate Republican, sensible Republican, combined with regular Democrat, or unpopular Democrat in this case. You see where the Democrats start to fall apart. You start to see where, in this election, Joe Biden would potentially fall apart. It's interesting to think about, to say the least. But right now, with this 1.4% margin of victory for Joe Lombardo, we have to ask, is this replicated elsewhere? The answer is no. In Arizona, Katie Hobbs was running against Kari Lake. It was a competitive election, but it was still one that Democrats weren't expecting to win. Competitive, yes, but Kari Lake was leading in every single poll, and the results were looking as if Kari Lake was on track to victory. She was pulling in numbers that we hadn't seen for Republicans in Arizona, especially on the same ballot as Blake Masters, and all it would have taken was 1 point more in favor of the left wing or the right wing for this state to have gone red. But ultimately it went blue because Kari Lake wasn't sensible. She wasn't the Republican these voters wanted. Wisconsin, Tim Michels, I said I would do it last, but I'm just going to bring it up now. Tony Evers defeated him by 3 points on the same ballot. The Republicans won the House election vote. They won numerous other votes. Why? Well, because Tim Michels was the Trump-endorsed, more right-wing Republican that wasn't electable across the state. Georgia, Brian Kemp won by 7 points. How do you ask that? He distanced himself from President Trump. So where's my takeaway from this? What am I telling you? Why am I telling you all these results? Why are they so important to note? Well, it's because the Republicans are making the same mistake they did in 2022. They're going with the most extreme member of their party, at least vocally, because they all represent the same ideology, but vocally speaking, Donald Trump is the most extreme. And looking at the policy points, they aren't popular, right? Death penalty for drug dealers, banning abortion after 6 to 10 weeks to 12 weeks, not a popular point. Anti-gay marriage, not a popular point, right? All of these stances the Republican Party takes, with the exception of a few, like affirmative action, the majority of the American public is not on their side. And the majority of the American public does not like Donald Trump. They may not love President Biden by any means. In fact, they dislike him more than they like him, but they dislike other people more. And as Hillary Clinton can tell you from the 2016 election, the power of not being that lesser of two evils cannot be understated. And looking at these 4 crucial swing states, Joe Biden is on track to win, quite frankly, all of them. And there's a reason for that. It's a testable theory that we saw tested in 2018, proven, 2020, proven, 2022, proven. Yet the Republican Party is on track to make the same exact mistake. But I don't think Democrats are complaining. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist from my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.